Got Jeff Wang on the podcast. Jeff is the owner of Modern Asian Kitchen as well as the Yum Dum food truck. And Jeff and I have conversed many times about the similarities between the fitness business and the restaurant business with low margins, difficult customers, and just having to grind all the time to be able to figure it out. And with the situation with COVID-19, I'm very concerned with the economics of restaurants, as I imagine they're taking a beating, just as we in the fitness industry are. So Jeff and I spent some time talking about the likelihood of restaurants surviving, as well as some of the dynamics of things like aggregator platforms like Grubhub, DoorDash, et cetera, and how that actually impacts the restaurant industry. So pretty interesting conversation here with Jeff. We get to find out what the prospects are for small ethnic restaurants serving regional cuisine, which is something close to my heart. And then, Jeff also shares some of his story about how he actually got into restaurants despite his parents sending him to college so he didn't have to work in the restaurant industry. So enjoy this one.
So basically the food truck and the restaurant are complete different beasts here. The food truck is so dependent on events, catering. That's pretty much 90% of our business. We don't really go out for lunches anymore. A lot of our daily routine is we go to a company, we feed them. It's all prearranged, and it's just
so to interrupt you quickly, is that common? Is that like a standard business model for food trucks to actually focus on catering?
Yeah, I think so. I wouldn't say that's all food trucks, but some food trucks do focus on going out for lunches and dinners primarily. But we've been doing this for, I think, 7 years now. And I would like to say I've grown to work smarter and not harder. So rather than going to hustle a lunch, I'd rather just book events and hustle that way per se.
Totally.
So our business model, it's very focused on catering and festivals, events. So like this is our busy time. Usually around April is when we start ramping up. Our calendar is pretty full. Weekends definitely are all booked up. Chicago is such an awesome city for this because we just have street fest after street fest, food truck fest in the suburbs. Like I always say, our bread and butter is like a suburban food truck fest because people have like limited options out there and they love coming out here and seeing all these food trucks. And those are just one cancellation after another. I mean, it's pretty crazy, so our lifeline for the food truck has really been cut off. On the other side of it, the restaurant, we're lucky enough to have a fast casual restaurant. Some people compare us to sort of like a Chipotle style Asian restaurant, healthier, modern takes on Asian food. So people just come in and order and take it to go. It's less focused on sit down. So, our business model has always been towards carry out and delivery. So something like this has, it hasn't affected us as much as maybe like a fine dining sit down restaurant. But, again, we do a ton of catering, and without any businesses out there, like going to the office, our catering is really non-existent right now. So, but we have ramped up our delivery and carry out, and we were able to adjust pretty well. So yeah, to kind of answer your question, definitely different. Completely different, the restaurant compared to the food truck.
Yeah, totally. So in terms of your actual whatever role, are you spending most of your time with the food truck, most of your time with the restaurant? Or are you kind of splitting between the two equally? What does that look like?
Daily, I spend, especially during the summertime, I spend a lot of my time with the food truck. I always say the food truck came first. It was like my firstborn. They need me to survive, whereas the restaurant came second, and it's like a stepchild that can, like a teenager stepchild that can run itself, and plus I have a general manager at the restaurant. So it's a well-oiled machine, and sometimes I feel like I'm in the way there, but definitely in the summertime, I'm very hands-on with the food truck. I'm working, a lot of times you'll catch me at the festivals, especially when it gets busy. I just get so nervous that it's like, that when I'm not there, I just think that they're like in the weeds and struggling. And then when I show up, they're like just perfectly fine. And I get confused. I'm like, what do you mean you don't need me? Like, so I'm very hands-on with the food truck. So again, during the summertime right now, normally our busy time, it's weird that, that I'm not like constantly on there and busy.
Yeah, totally.
I think they're actually getting pretty sick of me at the restaurant because like I'm like showing up every day and they're like, oh, you're here again, and normally that I'm at the food truck, so
they're like, all right, man, we got this. You can
go exactly.
back. You can go back to wherever you used to be. We don't need you.
Exactly.
So in terms of the actual impact on your business, you mentioned that the restaurant seems to be doing reasonably well. Is that, you're taking a small hit in terms of the number of orders that you're getting? Is it that you sort of positioned yourself as the type of restaurant that people would want to do carry out from before shutdowns went into effect? What does that look like?
Yeah, absolutely. I say this very cautiously because I know there's a lot of restaurants in a more difficult spot, and I just feel really fortunate. Our restaurant, we always had a very strong delivery and carry out platform. And, from the onset, I just felt like I tried to adapt to this and make the best out of it, and so as far as impact, our delivery and our carry out orders have actually increased. I think I just looked up by about 10 to 15% from years past for this particular month, and that's awesome. It's really humbling. Our community support has been huge, and largely people during this time, this pandemic, people really want to support local businesses, and we've really we always stress that we want to be a community presence. We've been doing events, we've been donating, and it's really cool. I think that's really important for businesses during this time. You can't just really sit back and just kind of think that the business is going to come to you. I think the businesses that are going to come out of this and even thrive in this is the ones that are able to adapt the most. I want to be, one thing is that I want to be proactive rather than reactive is what I always say. And so we've been really driving up our social media. We've been pushing online ordering, and people notice that, and it's really reflected in the sales. Again, this is different from a fast casual setting versus a fine dining setting. I think that this is going to change restaurants forever. I think that every restaurant going forward is going to have to adopt a certain version of this model, of the fast casual model. Some restaurants, they didn't do carry out and delivery, and they had to pivot overnight. And, I have friends that basically had to write a new menu. And I think that every restaurant going forward is going to have a certain capacity to handle this type of service. In fact, one of the things I read yesterday, I loved this. There's a Michelin star restaurant in San Francisco. I forget the name. Packed every night, hard to get a reservation, but they knew that life as they knew it was going to be different. So, they shut down for 3 weeks, and they literally built a counter, like a fast casual counter, and they changed basically the whole concept of the restaurant from fine dining to street food, because they said, hey, looking forward, restaurants are going to be different. We're not going to have the same packed houses we used to have, and we need to adjust in order to survive long term. So I want to say we're fortunate, in this is just a wordy way to say we're fortunate that we kind of already had this business model that lends really well to this type of situation. I know I have friends that are trying to figure out how to implement online ordering, and I've told them man, this is 2020. I feel like you guys should have had this to begin with, but they never had the need for it, so I felt like we're in a really good position, and sales have shown that.
Totally. So yeah, I mean, a lot of the stuff you're mentioning is something that as an outside observer of the restaurant industry, gives me a lot of concern, since I think there's a lot of parallels between the fitness industry and the restaurant industry in terms of being a primarily consumer-focused business where people have very high expectations, but the actual margins on the product or the service that you're providing are kind of low. So you have to meet this highly elevated customer expectation without a ton of profit, even in the most prestigious institutions, to be able to do that. So it's a very challenging business model. And so hearing you talk about this, okay, you guys have been set up to pivot to an entirely delivery-based model, or delivery and carry-out based model, pretty effectively, whereas other restaurants are not able to. You're sort of touching on this, but you think about the idea of a business model where, in the best of times, the margins are already thin, and then we're looking at dining room capacities being reduced long term, right? It's not just going to be, okay, cool, we're opening back up in 3 weeks and people are going to be packing dining rooms again. It's like, no, there's going to be limits on how many people can be in there. And then even in 6 months, when those limits are reduced, there's probably going to still be a significant percentage of the population that just elects to stay home, even if there are no specific restrictions. So I don't see how a restaurant focused on in-house dining can actually survive with already thin margins. Do you think is that an accurate assessment? What am I missing?
That's like spot on, Todd. I mean, that's really well said. Something I think about all the time, and when we talked about recording this podcast, is the similarity between the restaurant industry and the fitness industry. I mean, it is very true. You nailed it with thin margins and just how things are going to change. I think what I've seen from fitness industry professionals during this time is like the ones that have able to pivot and kind of diversify what they offer. Those are the ones that are going to thrive and kind of come out on the other side of this. I've heard, of course, live fitness now that never occurred to me ever, that would even be a thing, but I know my wife does a lot of live fitness classes now, Zoom fitness, Instagram fitness, one-on-one coaching, and even just how the actual facilities are going to have to change. Just like you said, how things, once this is over, the new norms are going to be different. The norms for gyms, the norms for restaurants, people, once this is over, if restaurants are used to operating at a 100% capacity and they're packed every night and they're super busy and they're making ends meet, making a little bit of profit. Well, now, the regulations might specify they can only have 50% capacity or 25% capacity. And I mean, your costs are all built out or are all built in to have that 100% capacity. So, if you're only allowed 50% people in your restaurant, is your rent going to be 50%? I think that this is going to be a reality that a lot of places are going to have to, they're going to have to change their entire business model and their cost structure in order to adapt to this. And that goes for fitness as well,
For sure. So for you guys, roughly what percentage of your business was carry out and delivery, and what percentage was in-house dining before any shutdowns took effect?
Yeah. So again, our business model has always been fast casual. Fast casual meaning order at the counter and then sit down and we'll just bring the food for you. There's no servers. So again, it's very heavily based on carry-out delivery. So I would say before all this, we were probably looking at about probably 70-30 carry-out deliveries, 70%, 30 dine-in. And primarily because, I mean, the restaurant is on a pretty popular stretch of Wicker Park, which is like a pretty foot traffic heavy area, as you know. And so we got a lot of walker by. There's street fests that drew in a lot of people. So 70-30, I would say now it's, obviously pivoted to be 100%. And I can see at best case scenario moving forward that it's probably going to be 80-20, like that's best case scenario. And to talk about it, like, again, we're fortunate to have that structure, but a fine dining restaurant that never did carry out delivery, they're going to need to pivot and do something where rather than relying 100% on dine-in, they're going to need to do something, whether it's 50-50, 60-40, but they need to find a completely new revenue stream. One thing I sent you was Fat Rice, Fat Rice, Michelin star restaurant, busy every night, small, intimate, dark space. I remember I couldn't get a reservation for there, but when I finally did, you're sitting like your table's so close to the
tables are
next
packed.
To you. Yeah.
Packed
I mean, you're sitting so close to the table next to you that I felt like I was in their conversation. And they just knew that was not going to fly, and that people wouldn't do that. And they could probably sit back and take tables out and just have less people in there, but that's not going to pay the bills. So they completely changed their structure, and now they're a Fat Rice market, and they offer to-go meals where you cook at home and Fat Rice like goods. And I'm sure they're great, and I really hope they do well. And again, it's probably just a short-term thing, but it just shows how no restaurant is, or I should say every restaurant is susceptible to this. No one is going to go unscathed out of this pandemic. And the ones that just think that they're going to go back to their, quote, norm of having packed houses, those are the ones that are going to be in for a rude awakening.
And do you have any idea what percentage of people are actively deciding, okay, I'm going to eat at Modern Asian Kitchen tonight, versus what percentage of people are kind of walking past and impulsively deciding to come in, right? Because I mean, in a delivery only environment, you sort of need to either stumble into that serendipity on people looking on Grubhub or Yelp or Googling or whatever, or have a base of people who are, specifically deciding to eat from your restaurant.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question, and a really analytical one that I should, as a business owner, probably look into. I don't know the exact numbers, but all I do know is what we can control is, I guess, the appease of eating at Modern Asian Kitchen. So, in an era of so much social media, my wife helps me run the social media, and we try to have a really good social media presence. We try to tell a story through our social media, and we've had people just look at it and say like, wow, that looks good, I'm going to go give it a try. But also, again, kind of to touch back on, we've been at the same location for 7 years. We are definitely a small family run business. Community is huge. So we have a lot of regulars, and I just feel that being on a busy strip, being visible, our community and our locals just know us, and so that feels good, So I guess I don't have a concrete number of how many people we're drawing in, but the best I can say is we put out, we put out a good vibe and a good personality and what we have to offer, and we've been fortunate, so I'm happy with that. I remember starting the food truck, starting my first food business. I just wanted people to like the food I was putting out, and it was a nerve-wracking experience. And it's this business is tough because you're putting your heart and soul on a plate to be judged by other people, and you want to be liked. And so I remember that first feeling at these little markets I was doing, and people we had this huge line, repeating customers, and that was the best feeling ever. And now it's just a continuation of that, when I see regulars and our community supporting us. It's just a really humbling thing.
So how hard do you take it when someone doesn't like your food then?
Oh man, I want to say that it doesn't bother me, but I all I can say is I've learned to cope with it better. There's certain things I can't control. I mean, I used to again with the food truck when I first started, every bad review I would lose sleep on. But now, I just kind of take it with a grain of salt, and I say I can't control everything. You can't please everybody. But yes, it's tough. When you're a small business, everything matters, and you want everyone to like it, and it hurts.
Yeah, I mean, I think that Yelp is something that's universally painful for restaurant owners, right? You see someone write some review and you're like, this is crazy. Like, how did this possibly happen? Or what is this person even talking about or whatever? So how do you actually deal with those Yelp reviews, and what are some of the most ridiculous ones you've gotten?
Oh man. You just got to take it with a grain of salt. You want to fix the problem that was at hand. But you can't lose sleep on it. And if you take every review you get to heart, or try to make like a major change based on every review, then you're probably gonna drive yourself crazy, And to think back on some reviews, I've gotten everything from good to bad, to ridiculous. I remember somebody, the food truck, like, all the time this happens. People say like they get food from the food truck and then they take it home. They drive it home like an hour away and their food's cold. And I'm like, I'm really sorry that happened, but the food wasn't cold when we made it on the food truck. I'm really sorry about that. And so like that stuff like drives me crazy. A lot of times people will just criticize for like I guess the main thing nowadays is everyone thinks they're a food critic, so with the emergence of cooking shows and everyone's like a food critic at their keyboard, so they'll just judge like this isn't really spicy enough for me and the flavors were just a little off, and it's like but then they always follow it with like, but overall it was a good meal. It's like, okay, like So we did our job there. Like, I'm sorry that like the spice level wasn't to your liking or and that stuff just drives me crazy. So again, I just I take everything with a grain of salt, and at the end of the day, I just want people to be happy with what we put out, and it seems like that's happening. So I don't take things to heart too much.
And are you able to extract anything useful from any of those reviews or feedback, or is it just all kind of like noise?
Oh, absolutely. I absolutely read those and take feedback the best I can. I think again, every business owner should. You have to try to filter out the noise and filter out what you can change. If they say, oh, the person working the window at the food truck or the person working the front of the restaurant is being rude, of course I'm going to look into it and see what's going on. If it's something I can't control, sure. But you have to take those into account. In fact, I just saw something the other day. Somebody mentioned like their food from Grubhub was cold, and it took like 2 hours to get there. And I had to like look into this because, well, these third-party apps, which is a whole nother conversation we can have, they don't care.
Don't worry, that's on my list to ask about.
Yeah, of course. Like, they don't care about like the food that they're delivering, so they just pick it up and they bring it to you. And one driver could take 3, 4, 5 orders, and like our food comes out really fast. So if you order it and the driver picks it up within 10 minutes, and they said that they got their food in 2 hours, and like that's just ridiculous and out of our control, And so of course I talked to Grubhub, and they said that that this shouldn't happen, and it's just on my radar. You have to have that stuff on your radar, and you want to be able to deliver like the best customer experience possible. So you have to just have your hand in like knowledge of everything that's going on. But yeah, so I definitely take feedback from these very seriously.
So you mentioned the various third-party apps, and that's something that I think a lot of people are curious about, especially now where everyone's ordering delivery and takeout, and you're sort of being forced to order through DoorDash or Grubhub or Yelp or whatever. And there's a lot of stuff going around about how these platforms are gouging restaurants. And then there's also this element that you mentioned of the actual service kind of being out of control of the restaurant. But do you see these as a net positive for you in the restaurant industry, or a net negative, or where do you stand on that?
Oh man, this is something I feel very, very passionate about. These third-party apps are a blessing and a curse. It's just so hard to get an understanding of whether they are positive or overall negative. Like, I see the argument on both sides. We use at Mac, at Modern Asian Kitchen, we use all of them. We use Uber Eats, Grubhub, DoorDash, Caviar, Ritual. I mean, all of them. And we have all these platforms. And I looked at my P&L from last year, and I paid more in commissions to these companies than actual profit. So I made them more money than myself. And I just feel like I'm working for them half the time. And, you know, my parents did this business. They were in this business for 35 years. And I remember, you know, learning from them, and they told me like what margins to expect, you know, and you know, the numbers just don't add up. And I'm talking to my mother about this, who's retired, and you know, our revenue is high, but our profit margin is low because one thing that my parents never had to account for is all these like commission rates, you know, and you know, it's kind of a false, you know, it's all smoke and mirrors per se. Like you're getting more revenue, but your profits are not rising, you know. But I do see the other side of it because, you know, we are in a society now that is very convenience driven. You know, how many people, I'm guilty of it at times too, when you're just lazy and you just look on your phone to see what you want to eat. It's kind of like, I don't know if it's a thing, but I call it like the Netflix effect. You know, you don't know what you want to watch, but you're just cruising through these like Netflix to see like what they have, you know. And so it does offer a whole new like consumer base of convenience driven people. But, you know, you have to ask yourself, at what cost does it come to you? You know, these third parties are taking 30% commission rates. People don't realize that from the restaurant. And then they're also taking money from the consumer, you know, on the other side of it too. I mean, they're making millions, billions of dollars, and they have no relation to the restaurants whatsoever. That's the part that really like bothers me. They don't care, you know, how much they take or how much it affects the restaurant, because they know, you know what, like if you don't want to work with us, you don't have to. And if you go out of business, we're going to find somebody else to replace you, you know. And the best thing that I've been saying is it should be a like symbiotic relationship where, you know, one helps the other and they both thrive, but it's very one-sided to me. You know, it's definitely, they prey on you. They tell you, you know, like, well, if you don't use us, you're missing out on a lot of people seeing you. And it's they just operate out of fear. We started working with them because I remember thinking to myself, well, I guess they're right. I don't want to not do it, because what if I miss out on all these people, you know, without ever thinking, okay, is this the right business decision? And, you know, I've been taking the time from this like pandemic time to really analyze this. And although we are using them, I'm trying to think of ways to not, or to develop our own system. Or I guess the biggest thing I'm hoping for is, as you said, with this pandemic, these like predatory rates that they charge have become more mainstream. People are realizing this. And like I've seen a lot of people say like, oh, I didn't know that the restaurants got charged. Well, now that this is out there, I really think that for the future, for restaurants to survive, that there needs to be some type of government regulation for these, you know, delivery apps, because it is going to be a part of everyday life. If there's already government regulations for every other industry, I absolutely think that there should be for these for the delivery industry as well. So hopefully that works. We're definitely going in the right direction. I've already talked to a couple aldermen. I've got a petition going. I know in San Francisco is ahead of the game here. They cap delivery commission rates to 15%. I know they were talking about it in Chicago, but it turned into a legality battle. Last I heard, Grubhub and these third parties were threatening to sue if there was a cap put on. And again, you know, that gets a little hairy. And I just think something needs to be done. And I know I'm just a little voice, but hopefully this starts a movement.
Yeah, so I want to just clarify exactly how this works, since I think that it's really important to understand it. So essentially, as a consumer, you order something from Grubhub or DoorDash or whatever, and you see the cost of the food, you see whatever the delivery fee is, and you potentially add a tip. And you're saying that in addition to all of that, the platform is actually taking 30% of the fee that you're paying for the food, correct?
Of the subtotal of the food. Yeah, they're taking 30% plus. I mean, the other side of it too. I mean, that's the baseline. So they also, want you to run promotions. You'll see free delivery promotions. If you order $20, we'll give you $5 off. Well, that's all usually at the expense of the restaurant. They send me emails, they call me all the time. Hey, we're going to run a free delivery promotion. Do you want to be a part of it? I'm like, okay, well, what's the catch? Like, well, each order comes at $5 cost to you. I'm like, $5 more, on top of the 30%. They're like, yeah, but if you don't do it, think about all the restaurants that are doing it, and you're really missing out. Like the consumer sees free delivery and they want that. So like, I'm just like, okay, I guess I'll do it. And that's just an example. There's always, they're always running promotions to get more users, but it's usually at the cost of the restaurant.
Yeah. And in terms of the actual pricing practices, then, are you able to just increase the cost of your food on the platform to compensate for the commission that they're charging?
They actually don't allow that. So that's another thing. That's a regulation that they have where that they do not allow you to increase your prices. It wouldn't make sense. And, I would say some places still do this. I won't name any names, but I definitely know places that do this still. And the consumers don't realize this, but like, that's what restaurants have to do in order to survive and even make money off these apps. So the consumer is actually paying more money, on these apps than if you just call the restaurant. But that's nowadays people don't really care because it's all a convenience driven thing. People don't even want to call restaurants. Again, I'm hoping that this leads to changes where online ordering is huge. I think every restaurant needs to develop their own online ordering platform, and hopefully that will, and make it super easy too, because let's be honest, that's one reason why we love, these third parties. It's just a couple clicks away. Well, hey, like if we can do that, internally through our website, what stops people from doing that? So I encourage people to go to the restaurant websites directly.
So in terms of the actual, having some vague idea of the general margins of restaurants and things like that, taking a 30% hit on every dish seems completely unsustainable, right? Even if you just factor in the cost of ingredients and then say, okay, and we pay a lease, how is it even possible that restaurants can afford to take a 30% commission on all the orders that are being done?
That's the magic question, right? I think it makes it really, really difficult. I just pulled up a balance sheet right now. We have a ton of bills, and our margins right now are about 5% right now, which is considering the revenue that we are bringing in and our outgoing expenses. That's like, it's a tough industry, and I've talked to other friends, and I've had friends say, oh man, you're at 5%. Like, that's really good. Like, you're really lucky,
yeah.
And like, that's sad, like it, I remember my mother growing up, helping her with this stuff. And again, like she didn't have these issues. And I just feel like this industry is even tougher because there's always people like in your pockets now. And, the cost of making $1 now is more difficult than ever. And some places, I like to say we are fortunate because we have a good customer base and a regular, a set of regulars, but some places they just rely solely on these third parties, and I don't know how they make a single dollar. I saw a dessert place yesterday. I got a sweet tooth, so I wanted to order dessert, and there's a place called the Dessert Box, and they're selling like slices of cake for $9.50, and I was like, that is absolutely ridiculous. And I thought back on it, like, okay, if you take out that 30%, that's probably like like a $6 slice, but they gotta charge these ridiculous prices because they don't even have a brick and mortar location. They're just solely, online based. So I think that, these consumers are just gonna have to deal with the reality of paying more, so that some of these restaurants can make that margin.
Yeah, so you're seeing that prices just get raised across the board so that there's not different prices between the various online platforms and the actual brick and mortar store. That's sort of the way that people are solving it.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, that is something that really like digs at me when I see someone say like, it was a good meal, but it was a little expensive. Well, like you don't realize the expenses that go into it. And that is a perfect example of a 30% chunk that gets taken right off the top, so
yeah.
Yeah.
And you mentioned this dessert place that doesn't actually have a brick and mortar location. So, the concept of ghost kitchens has popped up a few times in my recent reading, right? The idea of restaurants moving away from having actual locations and just operating out of kitchens that, just deliver food only. So, if platforms are taking 30% of the revenue and rent is taking 30% of the revenue, there's really not much left. So if restaurants can figure out a way to maybe keep using the platforms and then cut the expenses of rent, that potentially solves that problem as well. What have you seen with any of that stuff?
Yeah, I've been approached by a lot of ghost kitchens. I used to be kind of against it, but honestly, with the start of this pandemic, I've realized that maybe they're not that bad. Maybe they're onto something. Because you got to cut. You have to make cuts to increase your margins, and sometimes your overhead expenses of rent, labor, sometimes those are pretty high. And there's definitely no question that these third parties will drive business to you, but it's all about how you are structured to handle these costs, right? So for an existing restaurant to take these costs on, you might be break even at best, but the virtual kitchens or ghost kitchens, they're saying, okay, well, what if you can cut out your expenses and like you can't do anything about that 30%, but what if you can cut out your labor force? And a lot of these ghost kitchens are just like 1 or 2 man teams, and I think it's definitely an interesting way of the future. I don't know if I buy in 100% yet. Like I got into this business because I love talking to people. I love seeing people. I put my heart and soul into the work that I do. So I can't imagine just working behind a computer screen the whole time, and just sending my food out there. I think so. It depends on what you're looking for. So these ghost kitchens might not be for someone like me, but I do see how it cuts down costs.
For sure. And then you mentioned the idea of setting up your own online ordering. Is there some sort of white label solution for restaurants to be able to just implement their own online ordering system that isn't necessarily part of, an aggregator platform like Grubhub or whatever? Like, can you just sign up for the equivalent of Shopify for restaurants and be like, great, here's my menu, here's my website, it has a clean user interface, it integrates with Stripe, and people can just order?
That's a great question. It's really not that easy. I wish it was. And we use a POS system, point of sale system called Toast, and they have integrated online ordering, which makes it super easy. But Toast is not free. In fact, it's like super expensive, and most people don't have access to it. So we have an easy, like you can go on our website and hit order now, and it links to our POS. You can put your order in just as if like the person working up front is doing it, and you put in your order and pay. So that's great. But we get constant calls about companies that will build you a website. They'll build you your own platform. There's a really great one called Chow Now. They'll build you your own app. But it all comes at a cost, like as a small business, so the food truck's different. We don't have that. And like an app sounds fantastic, but I just don't have $2,500 to drop to get an app built for me. But this is a completely non-sponsored plug here, but there is this really great app I started working for, or not for, I'm sorry, working with. They're called Cashdrop, and it's a guy that literally I came across, and this app is awesome for food trucks. It kind of does what you say. It's no cost for the businesses, so I just took it on as from the truck, and it just has a small fee to the consumer, and that's kind of how they make their money. And it just as you said, it integrates with Stripe, so that's how you do your payments, all secure, and it's really cool. In fact, I really think this is like the way of the future. I think that this company and other companies need to work with the companies or like these restaurants hand in hand to simplify it. Again, this app allowed me to I was able to put my logo, put my restaurant info, upload my menu really easily. And it's really user friendly. And I think that there needs to be more of these, I'm sure they're not the only one, but this is the one that I've come across most recently that I really liked using. And so that's a really great question. There needs to be more things like this that make it easier for restaurants to just be able to do this, to put themselves out there. But again, not to take away, everyone knows these big companies and they bring you a ton of business, so even though Modern Asian Kitchen has their own website, how do I get these people to say, hey, I want to order tonight, let's go to the Modern Asian Kitchen website, rather than cruising through their caviar and seeing us and be like, oh, that sounds good. You really have to be it's how to get in people's mind thought, I guess, and that's the difficult part.
Totally. And so, you mentioned this idea of platforms just sort of sucking up all the profit, right? And we see the same thing with social media advertising, where it seems like a great idea for companies to run Facebook ads. It's yeah, you can run Facebook ads and you can get all this traffic, and it does work. But over time, what you see is that as more and more competitors enter the market offering similar products, the cost per click starts to go up, right? And Facebook itself starts just taking bigger and bigger chunks of the actual profit. And someone is always going to be willing to run the ad for 1 cent more than you or 2 cents more than you and take a little bit of a hit in terms of what they can actually get from it. So over time, these aggregators just start to suck up all the profit, and then the people who actually are creating the content are left with less and less. So it's sort of the difference between trying to set up your own email list where you actually have control over who signs up for and being able to deliver, targeted messaging to those individuals versus saying, I have to actually pay this platform that wants me to succeed and stay in business, but their interest is potentially just going to be, I'm going to take as much of a chunk of this as I possibly can.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. And kind of piggybacking off of that, my wife loves eating Sweetgreen, and they have an awesome app. And I used it the other day, and I was like, wow, this app is fantastic. It's so easy. It's so visually friendly. And she has been a customer for long enough where she always orders off the app. Same with Starbucks. So I ask her all the time, okay, what makes you use the app over, calling them or looking online? And she says, I don't know, the ease and it's almost like they train you to do that. And that's what you got to do.
Yeah. And a question on that then, right? Because this idea of having an app for something like Starbucks makes sense, but I'm skeptical of the idea of every restaurant having their own app.
Yeah.
Right? Because I may be a Starbucks consumer, but let's say I want to go to Modern Asian Kitchen. I go to Chipotle sometimes. I go to Northern City, an ethnic Chinese restaurant by my place. I go to Sweetgreen sometimes. I go to, a taco joint. I'm not going to have an app for each of those, right?
Yeah,
the mind space for an app for a restaurant, maybe you have 1 or 2 that you actually use.
Yeah, no, that's really true. I don't want all those apps. That's a good question. How do you fix that? And maybe there's a need for a platform, sort of like these third parties. But, everything comes at a cost. If somebody creates a platform that just puts us on there, they're going to want a piece of it. That's just how I feel the digital world is nowadays.
Yeah, and with the larger platforms, the Grubhubs, et cetera, is there a pitch to you that they're just going to drive business, or is there a pitch to you that they're going to drive awareness of consumers who will then down the line, just come straight to Mac? Are they trying to take a piece of every transaction, or are they telling you we're giving you customers with whom you'll have a long-term relationship off the platform?
It's a good point too. They drive home both points. So they say, we're going to give you so much visibility that these customers are going to love your food and they'll just become regulars. And that is just absolutely like not true.
We've seen the same theme in the fitness industry. Anytime a platform says like, yeah, we're going to raise awareness or whatever, it's like bullshit. No, you're not.
Exactly.
You might get a few customers on the margin, but these people aren't coming back independently.
Absolutely. And the thing that really drives me crazy is then I've seen our regulars that just come in all the time. They'll start ordering off these apps and third parties, and I'll be like, hey, like, why don't you just call us? And they were offering like a $5 off thing today, and I'm like, what the heck? So like. But honestly, I think these third-party people, like, they'll never say it, obviously, because it obviously won't sell anything. But they just want to steal your customers, or they want to drive up their usership. They also know that, like, I'm sure there's some type of analytics that, like, for every first-time user of this app, they generate like X amount of money from these people. So I think the long-term wise, it's definitely not for the restaurants or the business's best interests, but that's just my stance.
Yeah, and without knowing a bunch of the details of the way those platforms work, right? You can assume that all those companies are venture capital backed companies, so their interest is driving up engagement, driving up active users, et cetera, for a long-term monetization play in order to increase the valuation of their company. So they just want to show increased analytics of how much people are using the platform. They're not even necessarily trying to make a profit for themselves. Yeah, right. They're just trying to say, hey, we want to raise another round of this much money, or we want our stock price to be this high.
Yeah, really true.
Yeah, it's a dangerous. That's quite a pickle. Sounds like someone should solve it.
I know, it's hard. This is it's frustrating because like people like us, we realize it, but then I feel like I'm just a small voice, and but hey, I guess it needs to start somewhere. I have these like grand thoughts where like I'm going to change this whole industry, but I guess it takes one step at a time. I'm having trouble just getting aldermen to respond to me.
I would say that aldermen are not the most historically responsive people in my experience either.
I've made some good headway with this third-party regulations, though. It's gone all the way up to the Illinois Restaurant Association, and I have some good contacts there, and up to the governor. And I mean, they just have so much stuff on their plates. But this is real. This is a real problem that restaurants are facing, and long-term wise, for us to thrive and survive, I think that this needs to be addressed. So hopefully, we'll see some good stuff on it.
Yeah, I mean, it just seems like a long-term, very dangerous situation for restaurants, which are often the lifeblood of communities that they're in, and what people think of when they think of culture of cities. If you have platforms sucking up 30% of revenue and you have restrictions in terms of the number of people who can actually dine in, it's like this seems like a situation that, even if restaurants make it through short-term shutdown, like what are we going to see in 6 to 9 months as these business models just continue to take a beating?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I definitely would never hope that this pandemic and shutdown happens ever again. But, it's raised eyebrows, and it's brought things to the forefront that, we might not have thought about or had the time to look into as much. Or I know, this is something I feel passionately about, and I'm just so busy in the summertime. I'm just like, man, I know I want to do it. I just don't have the time to. So I've really been able to focus a lot more on the behind the scenes stuff. And again, I'm not appreciative. Like, I'm not happy about this time, but I'm glad I'm able to use it for good. And
so, yeah. You mentioned a few times your family's history in the restaurant business. What was your parents' restaurant like? What was the deal with that?
Oh, just they owned Asian American, Chinese American restaurants growing up. It was called China Palace. Yeah, it was like my whole entire childhood. I mean, I'm talking football, basketball practice. I used to get picked up by the delivery man. Like that's not even an exaggeration. I used to get dropped off at like dates by the delivery guy, and it was such
like, why do you smell like peanut oil?
it was such a norm for me though. Like that's all I knew, and but yeah, they ran a couple restaurants, just neighborhood places. You know, everyone knew that was like my family's restaurant, and I just loved it. I loved the community aspect. My mom became like a staple in the community. Everyone knew her, and that just lit like the fire for me to do this and continued on again. I wouldn't go back to account even with all this pandemic stuff and you know all the perils that small businesses are in. I would never give this up to go back to a computer again. This is just what I do. It's been ingrained, and I learned everything from my parents. So
totally. And so with some experience in this sort of like smaller ethnic restaurant, which selfishly those are the restaurants that I enjoy frequenting the most myself. Is that business model more robust to this kind of disruption than some other ones that are, requiring a certain social status or going somewhere to, be seen or potentially have an experience that results in you being willing to spend a certain amount of dollars per plate? Is it more robust? My intuition would be that it is, but I'm just not sure if I'm off base there.
So to clarify, you're asking if something like this affects them more, or is that what you're asking?
Or potentially less, right? Because
Okay.
my uneducated opinion would be that restaurants that rely on social status, that have large commercial leases, are potentially in a lot of trouble because people aren't going to be going out to be seen.
Yeah.
And the rent burden of being somewhere that is like a nightlife hotspot is going to be potentially extremely destructive on a small business.
Yeah,
but an ethnic restaurant in a strip mall, right, like relatively low rent, their margins are actually set up so that they're making money on the food, not just people being willing to spend $50 on drinks, et cetera. So I'm curious if I'm wrong or if that's maybe accurate.
It's a little bit of both. To be completely honest, these like big restaurant groups, it's kind of like the bigger you are, the harder you fall. I think I always get things wrong, but they need to generate a much higher per person like bill, to survive, and they offer these experiences and they offer these special occasions, and that's why people keep going to them. But there is a certain amount of power to that as well. I know in Chicago, people are thrilled with the fact that like Alinea and some of these Michelin star restaurants, they're offering carryout and
yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And honestly, like Alinea is killing it. I bet you, I mean, I have no backing to this, but I bet you they make more doing these carryouts than they were, doing this.
They do.
I saw.
They do. I actually heard to Nick from Alinea on a podcast recently. Yeah, and he said that they had their highest grossing night ever. One of the nights that they started doing carryout,
which is absolutely insane. So those companies have a certain power to those names, but yes, those are like few and far between. For the most part, it's usually during this, the bigger you are, the harder you're feeling this. But also. I do know a lot of like ethnic restaurants, small businesses. Those are usually small businesses, right? We don't have big restaurant groups backing us, and there's a certain like resiliency to small businesses. Like I've grown up like watching my parents do this, and there's like nothing I wouldn't do. There's nothing they wouldn't do to survive. We're like crafty, and we'll adapt however we need to. Like I actually have to go work tonight, and I'm cooking because I had to lay off one of my cooks, and I literally just learned how to, like, I've run restaurants. I've never cooked at the restaurants, but I've had to learn how to cook because this is what I got to do to get by. You're not going to see Nick Kokonas from Alinea behind the line cooking because he had to lay off somebody. So I think that goes into just like the craftiness and the resiliency of small businesses. Not to say they're affected less, they just have a different way of doing things. It's really interesting.
Yeah, totally. I have my fingers crossed that that some of the smaller regional ethnic dining places in Chicago will be able to make it through. But yeah, to your point, I think that a lot of the folks who are potentially highly leveraged and are backed up by a bunch of investment that aren't necessarily profiting on the actual meals that they're selling, that those folks are in a lot of trouble.
Yeah, and sorry, just to piggyback off that as well. Another thing I've realized too is like if you're a lot of small businesses were like cash backed, right? So like I opened up my businesses just with savings and loans that I took from family, and there's not a lot of bank loans and stuff, So a lot of these big companies, big restaurant groups, they have a ton of expenditures and liabilities, and they're bringing in a ton of income, but there's also a lot of costs going out. So that's why those are maybe affected more, those bigger companies, because the more I guess I don't know the right term, but the more lending based you are, you're going to feel this a lot harder than a cash, small business.
Yeah, totally. So yeah, fingers crossed. We'll see what actually happens.
Yeah.
So Jeff, you got to work out before you go in and start cooking tonight. Are you going to get yelled at for screwing up the meals? What's the plan?
So it's really funny you say that, because I've taught myself how to cook on the line, and I've told them, like, I need you guys to tell me when things are wrong or not done right, and not just tell me it looks good because I'm like the boss, like I need you guys to be completely honest. And at first it took a little while, like they were like, yeah, that's pretty good. I'm like, no, that pretty good does not cut it. Like, so you're right. They're pretty honest with me now. They'll be like, that looks like shit. You need to recook that.
All right, cool.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, to in their defense, I think it's not necessarily just because you're the boss also, but I mean, I'm thinking about from a coaching perspective, right? If someone's learning to snatch and they don't know what the hell they're doing, what they're doing might actually be pretty good in the sense that your expectations are low and that they're overwhelmed and just trying. So you're like, hey, that's not bad. Like, keep doing it, because if you just do 15 more reps, it's going to get better, and I don't even need to tell you anything. So that may have been part of it. And then you may have, reached a threshold where it's like, all right, it's time to start actually fixing this now.
Yeah, no, that's true. And when I go to a different CrossFit gym, like, I mean, I've been doing CrossFit for a long time, and I'm definitely by no means an expert, but people might think like, oh, this guy's been doing it for a while, I'm not going to correct him on certain things. But like, I relish in that stuff. I love when people are like, hey, I can tell, like, like some coaches might say like, oh, I'm not going to correct him, but others will pinpoint things, and I love that stuff. I'd rather have that. But so I guess it depends on the person.
Totally thirsty for feedback. So Jeff, if people want to order food, they should go to Grubhub and search for Modern Asian Kitchen. But if they wanna, cut out the middleman, where do you want people to go? Where should they order from? Where should they follow you on social? What's the deal?
Yeah, absolutely. Look us up. It's called Modern Asian Kitchen. Our website is MAK restaurant.com. Look us up on Instagram. You can order directly from the website. We're in Wicker Park. You can also look up the food truck. The food truck is called Yum Dum. So our handle is Yum Dum Truck on all the different platforms. And yeah, just give us the food truck is not operating right now, but we can't wait to be at festivals. So if you're listening to this and you're not local to Chicago, the food truck is going to be all over the Chicagoland area, and hopefully pretty soon.
Beautiful. And back doing events once events happen again.
Yeah. Hopefully sooner rather than later. Fingers crossed.
Thanks for listening. If you like the show, the best thing to do would be to send it to one of your friends who also likes podcasts. If you want more, I have an email list where I send out a weekly update with all the podcasts I've recorded and articles that I've written. I also include my favorite things that I've been reading or listening to as well. You can sign up for that at www.toddneve.com. That's I before E, or you can open up the show notes in your podcast player and click the link in there.